Welcome back to the channel Shamina Sarfadin, and here in this video we are going to see yet another subject regarding the clinical research. So looking at the picture like ethics are values. Why ethics or values are very important in case of clinical research or in case of clinical trial. As far as clinical research is concerned, it is a complex subject which deals with the difficult science. The main aim of this clinical research is to find out a chemical compound that will help in preparing a curative for a disease. So it is more concerned with the human subjects. Here in the clinical research, we involve a lot of humans for the trials, and thereby we should ensure that the safety of the patient is more important, and thereby we prepare some quality medicine that could be available for the public. And that is why clinical research looks into the ethics part, a very important role. Looking into the informed consent. So what does this form means? When you look at the picture, you can see a woman or a doctor sitting in front of the subjects who are able to undergo the clinical trial and explaining it what is there in the consent form. So this informed consent is a form which says the first mandatory thing is whether the subject, whom we say the person who are ready to undergo the clinical trial, he or she can either agree or disagree with it. So this consent will give a detailed picture about whether the person agree for the trial or disagree, and thereby there could be a mandatory signature part where he can go through what has been written over there and finally make a signature, which means that particular subject is agreeing to undergo the clinical trial or the clinical research. And this piece of paper, that is the informed consent, should be very detailed. Detailed in the sense it is the necessity of the healthcare professional, that is from the pharmaceutical side and the biotechnology side, should make them very clear what is being undergone into the trial. And also, the informed consent should very well describe what are the risk factors and also what are the benefits. And one thing we need to see, the risk factor should be always less than the benefit part. And one more thing, when we inform a concern with the seriousness of the clinical trial, the language is very important. Sometimes the informed concern may not understand the English, where he or she cannot come in touch what really the clinical research means or what is actually going to happen. At that time, it is more necessary, it has to be written in the language where the person can understand with, and make them very clear about what is about the clinical trial. Sometimes we can see a few children as well as the adult getting into the clinical trial. And to inform these children about the trial or the research, it typically difficult when compared to the adult. At that time, the informed consent may have some cartoon way of representation where a very clear idea could be informed to the children. For the adults, it could be in a different way where they could be understand what is about the clinical trial about. So this informed consent, which gives us the complete information, has to be taken care by the pharmaceutical employer, which is given by the regulations of India, which makes sure that the participants are very much clear about what is going to happen in the clinical trial. For example, what type of trial it is, when it is going to start up, and what is the study is going to focus on. Is the project is going to be there for a duration of 3 months or 3 years or whatever it is. So that duration should also be specified. The days and months how the clinical trial is being taken care should also be informed in that particular informed consent. And these data should be reliable and should be made understood for the person. For example, we can say when there is a concern with a patient who has to come for a clinical test, for a blood test. So the patient should be made available. They should be known at what time they need to come in the morning and the condition how they need to travel to us. Whether they have to be in a fasting stage or they have to come after their meals, after their morning supper, whatever it is. So we have to make them pretty clear about how the procedure, the protocol that you are going to adopt in, and thereby they get a very clear picture and they become more comfortable with us to work on with our clinical trial. So this informed consent, which looks like a piece of paper, is going to gather multiple informations about all these aspects. Only then we could be clear about what we actually going to do with. And also, we should see the flexibility of the patient. That is what I said earlier about the risk and if there is any discomfort. And also, we should say about what is about the medical emergency purposes that the clinical trial time is going to do with. For example, if a subject is undergoing the clinical trial, and in that case, if there is an injury, how well he has a protection or a coverage wherein we can take care about the patient because those subjects are under our own concern. They are there for our own clinical trials, and it is mandatory for the clinical researcher to take care of the patient whoever into the clinical trial. And the history and everything should be stated over there. And the most important thing is the voluntariness. And it should not be into compulsion. Any patient or any subject should not be compelled for undergoing the clinical research part or the clinical trial part. It purely depends upon the voluntariness, the willingness of the patient. And for example, if the patient is undergoing the clinical trial under a particular stage, he or she is discomfort, he's not comfortable at all. They need to leave, and it is the necessity of the clinical researcher to allow them to get out of our project. At that time, we are not supposed to compel them and retain us into our clinical research. And we are not supposed to collect any sort of subsidiary or charges or whatever we lost, we are not supposed to get it from them. And this sort of freedom should also be mentioned over there. So all these guidelines, the picturization, the clarity, and how we are going to work on with, and what are the risk benefits, and what are going to be the benefits, and how we are going to safeguard them. All these come under this particular letter, which we call it as informed consent. By knowing the informed consent in a very detailed way, very well, I suppose the clinical trial can happen in a positive way. To say more about the guidelines, yeah, of course, we need to focus on what is a clinical trial, the laws embedded in it, the guidelines, regulations, and the ethics. So what is a clinical trial? It's nothing but a clinical research which is being controlled by the regulations, laws, and it has been conducted based on the prescribed guidelines and ethical considerations. Looking at the law, it's a rule of conduct that is being enforced by a controlling authority. Regulations, the act of controlling, managing, or directing according to the rules that could be led by the laws governed by the regulatory bodies. And to say about the guidelines, it is the written instructions that need to be followed for the credible and the standardized act. The ethics, whatever are safety aspects. After all, we are human beings, and this is more important to look into the clinical research part. Looking into the different worldwide regulations for the clinical research. Of course, the countries like USA, India, Canada, Australia, UK, Europe, Switzerland, and Japan have their own regulations to carry on with the clinical research. In USA, the United States Food and Drug Administration, USFDA, is the regulation part. In India, the Central Drug Standard Control Organization, CDSCO. In Canada, the Health Canada, Santé Canada. In Australia, Therapeutic Goods Administration, TGA. And in UK, it is Medicine and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, MHRA. In Europe, it is the European Medicines Agency, EMEA. And in Switzerland, it is Swiss Media, whereas in Japan, it is the Ministry of Health, Labour and Welfare, MHLW. And these are the different international, worldwide regulatory bodies that which regulates the particular country's regulation. And there are also international and national Indian guidelines. Looking at the international guidelines, mainly it concentrates on two factors. One is ICH GCP, where GCP indicates the good clinical practice. It is an international conference on harmonization good clinical practice. So there are many good clinical practice which needs to be followed for a very good clinical research to happen. And CMOS, that is the Council for International Organization of Medical Sciences, in guidelines, which are being jointly ventured with the WHO and the UNESCO. And to say about the Indian guidelines, we do have Indian GCP, ICMR, Indian Council of Medical and Research, the guidelines for special biomedical research on the human subjects. And these are the guidelines which governs both the international and the national part. Coming to the ethics and clinical research, it is more important because it refers to the moral principle governing the human character and the conduct. Because the humans have a life, right? So that is why it is more important look into the ethics. And it covers the analysis and the employment of concepts such as right, wrong, whether it is good or evil, the responsibilities, the values, and custom of a person or a group. It will look after the ethics committee, mainly which are concerned with the institutional review board, which we call it as IRB, and the Independent Ethics Board, IEC. So, looking into all these concerns and their regulations, the clinical research could be carried out in a smooth way. So, thank you for the patient listening of the ethics and the regulations in the clinical research. To know more about the clinical research and the clinical trial process, stay tuned to the channel Shamina Sarfadin. Thank you once again.